Sometimes the people who fly the highest are the ones running from what's waiting on the ground. Wade Ellar knows that truth better than most. At 48, he's spent the last 3 years delivering supplies across the Alaskan wilderness, keeping to himself and staying in the sky where grief can't catch up with him. His wife is gone. His son won't return his calls. The empty house back in Fairbanks feels more like a museum than a home. But on a cold January afternoon, Wade spots something impossible carved into a frozen lake 30 miles from anywhere, 3 letters scratched deep into the ice. SOS. No distress calls, no cabins nearby, just a desperate message waiting in the middle of nowhere. What happened out there on that frozen lake? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Cessna 185 cut through the winter sky at 8,000 feet, steady and sure. Wade Ellar had his hands light on the yoke, the kind of touch that came from 20 years of flying these routes across the Alaskan wilderness. Below him stretched an endless canvas of white spruce forests, heavy with snow, frozen rivers like silver veins, and mountains that rose like the backbone of the world itself. At 48, Wade had turned flying into something more than work. It had become his refuge, his escape from everything waiting on the ground. The empty house in Fairbanks, the son who'd stopped calling, the grief that sat in his chest like permafrost, frozen solid and going nowhere. He'd left before dawn with a full load of supplies, diesel fuel for a mining camp, medical supplies for a research station, mail for folks who'd chosen to live so far from civilization that the only reliable way to reach them was by air. January 17th, 18, below zero at altitude, the kind of cold that made metal brittle and engines stubborn. The radio crackled. Tailwind 79er, this is Fairbanks Dispatch. You copy? Go ahead, Moira. Just checking in, Wade. Weather's holding steady your direction. You should have clear skies all the way to Wolverine Camp. Roger that. About 40 minutes out. Moira Hutchins had worked dispatch for the small freight company longer than Wade had been flying for them. 65, sharp as a tack, with a voice that could cut through static like a beacon. She worried about him more than he deserved, though he'd never admit it. Wade set the mic back and let his eyes drift across the wilderness below. This was where he felt most at peace, suspended between earth and sky, alone with the engine noise and his thoughts. Up here, there were no difficult conversations to avoid, no empty rooms waiting back home, no photographs collecting dust on surfaces he couldn't bear to look at. The wedding ring hanging from a chain around his neck shifted as he adjusted in his seat. Lenore's ring, white gold, simple, exactly like her. He'd stopped wearing it on his finger after the funeral, but couldn't bring himself to take it off completely. She'd been gone 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Pancreatic cancer, 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Wade had watched the strongest woman he'd ever known waste away in a hospital bed while he stood by, completely helpless. He'd faced down mechanical failures at altitude, emergency landings on frozen lakes, once even a small fire in the cargo hold. But he couldn't fight the thing killing his wife. Kieran had been there, of course. Their son had flown up from Seattle where he was finishing graduate school. 23 years old, trying to be strong for both of them while his mother slipped away. Wade remembered how Kieran would sit by Lenore's bed for hours, reading to her, making plans for trips they'd take when she got better. They both knew she wouldn't get better. After the funeral, Wade had shut down. He knew it, recognized it, even as it was happening, but couldn't stop himself. Kieran tried to stay, tried to help his father process the grief. Wade pushed him away with silence and short answers, until his son finally gave up and went back to Seattle. They'd spoken maybe a dozen times since then. Awkward phone calls, where neither said what they meant, where Wade pretended he was fine and Kieran pretended to believe him. The last real conversation was an argument. Kieran had called on what would have been Lenore's 54th birthday. Wade had been drinking something he rarely did but couldn't avoid that day. Words were exchanged. Painful. True words. "You died with her, Dad," Kieran had said, his voice breaking. "I lost both of you that day, but at least Mum didn't have a choice." Wade had hung up. Hadn't called back. That was 8 months ago. Now Kieran was 26, working for some environmental consulting firm in Seattle, and Wade couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his son's voice. The phone worked, both ways. He knew that. But every time he thought about calling, the weight of everything unsaid seemed too heavy to lift. So he flew. Took every route offered, volunteered for the difficult runs, the weather-dependent deliveries other pilots turned down. Left his small house before sunrise, returned after dark. Ate meals from gas stations, slept when exhaustion forced him to. His mechanic Boone had called him out on it 6 months back. "You're running, brother," Boone had said, wiping grease from his hands. "Been watching you run yourself ragged for 2 years now. Whatever you're running from, it's still going to be there when you stop." Wade had just nodded, paid for the oil change, and scheduled another flight. Boone was 58, built like a barrel, with hands that could rebuild an engine blindfolded, and a heart bigger than the territory itself. He'd lost his own wife to a stroke 10 years earlier, so he understood grief in ways most people didn't. He never pushed, never judged, just offered quiet companionship in the form of coffee and honest work. The house in Fairbanks had become exactly what Wade told himself it was: a museum. Lenore's things were still arranged the way she'd left them, her books on the shelves, organized by author, her coffee mug in the cupboard, the one with the chipped handle she'd refused to throw away, her jacket still hanging by the door because Wade couldn't bring himself to move it. He'd lived in that house for 15 years. Brought Kieran home from the hospital to it, celebrated birthdays and Christmases and quiet Sunday mornings. Watched Lenore plant a garden every spring that she tended, with the same care she gave everything in her life. Now he just slept there, when he slept at all. The sun was starting its early descent this far north in January. Daylight was precious. Wade glanced at his watch. 2:30 in the afternoon, and already the light was taking on that golden quality that preceded the long winter dusk. He'd make his delivery to Wolverine Camp, head over to the research station at Cooper's Ridge, then swing back toward Fairbanks. With luck, he'd be home by 6. Home. The word felt hollow. Wade was 15 minutes out from Cooper's Ridge, flying over country that rarely saw human presence, when something caught his eye. A frozen lake below, maybe 2 miles across, surrounded by dense spruce forest. Mirror Lake, according to his charts. He'd flown over it 100 times, barely gave it a thought. But today, something was different. Wade squinted, then reached for the binoculars he kept in the side pocket. He brought the plane into a gentle bank, circling back for another look. There, on the surface of the frozen lake, were 3 massive letters carved into the ice. Each letter had to be at least 30 feet tall, the trenches dark against the white surface. SOS. Wade felt his pulse quicken. He grabbed the radio. "Fairbanks dispatch, this is Tailwind 79er. Go ahead, Wade. Moira, I'm looking at Mirror Lake, about 40 miles northwest of Cooper's Ridge. Someone's carved SOS into the ice. Big letters, had to take serious work. You have any distress calls on record for this area?" A pause. "Stand by." Another pause. "Tailwind 79er. Negative on distress calls. Nothing on record for that area in the past 6 months. You sure about what you're seeing?" "Positive." 3 letters, each about 30 feet tall, carved into the center of Mirror Lake. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make this visible from the air. Wade kept circling, studying the scene below. The letters were crude but clear, obviously carved with desperate intent. He scanned the surrounding forest and shoreline, looking for any sign of a camp, a downed plane, anything. Nothing. Just endless white forest and the message carved in ice. "Copy that. I'll contact search and rescue, get someone out there to investigate." Wade checked his fuel. He had enough for a detour, but landing on an unknown, the frozen lake in fading light was risky. Protocol said to mark the coordinates, report it, and let the professionals handle it. But he kept circling, studying the ice below. Whoever had carved that message was either still out there waiting for help, or had been waiting and given up. Or worse, he thought about his delivery schedule, thought about protocol, thought about the safe, sensible choice. Then he thought about someone desperate enough to carve 30-foot letters in ice with whatever tools they could find, hoping that anyone might see it and care enough to check. Moira, I'm going to take a look, going to set down and do a quick survey. Wade, you sure that's wise? Light's fading, and you don't know how stable that ice is. I'll be careful. Keep this frequency open. Roger. Be safe, Wade. Wade descended, making 2 low passes over the lake to check the ice conditions and look for visible hazards. The surface appeared solid, no obvious cracks or pressure ridges. The SOS was carved near the center, and he could now see tracks in the snow leading away from the letters toward the eastern shore. He lined up his approach, extending the skis, and brought the Cessna down gently. The ice held. He taxied slowly toward the SOS, constantly listening for any sounds of cracking or shifting. When he was about 50 yards from the carved letters, he cut the engine and sat for a moment, listening. Silence. Just the wind and the settling sounds of the cooling engine. Wade pulled on his heavy parka, grabbed his emergency kit and rifle. You never went into the backcountry without a rifle, and stepped out onto the ice. The cold hit him like a physical force, 20 below at least with the wind chill. He walked toward the letters, following the tracks in the snow. Up close, the SOS was even more impressive. Someone had used something sharp, maybe an ice axe or even a knife, to carve trenches several inches deep. Hours of work, probably days. The desperation of it settled in Wade's chest like a stone. He followed the tracks toward the eastern shore, his breath coming in clouds, his boots crunching on the frozen surface. As he got closer to the trees, he began to notice other details. Disturbed snow in patches, what looked like drag marks, and then pieces of wreckage partially buried in snowdrifts. A plane, small, single engine, probably a Piper or similar craft. The tail section was visible, sticking up out of a snowbank. The rest was buried or broken, scattered among the spruce trees at the lake's edge. Wade's heart hammered. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone here? This is Wade Ellar, bush pilot. I saw your signal." No response, just wind through the spruce branches. He approached the wreckage carefully, rifle ready but not aimed. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" Then, faint but unmistakable, a voice. "Here, we're here." Wade moved faster, pushing through the snow toward the voice. Behind a fallen spruce tree, partially sheltered by a makeshift lean-to of branches and torn fabric, he found them. 3 people. A woman, maybe mid-30s, her face raw with frostbite but her eyes alert and focused. An elderly man with a splinted leg, his face grey with pain. An elderly woman wrapped in layers of fabric and sleeping bags, shivering despite the insulation. The younger woman looked at Wade with an expression that mixed disbelief, relief, and something close to awe. "You came," she whispered. "You actually came." Wade dropped to his knees beside them, already assessing their conditions with the practiced eye of someone who'd done emergency medical training. "How long have you been out here?" 3 weeks, the woman said. 3 weeks tomorrow. We'd almost given up. Wade pulled out his radio. "Moira, I've got survivors. 3 of them. I'm going to need medical evac, but they need immediate attention. Stand by for coordinates and conditions." The younger woman's name was Natasha Cord, 35, a wildlife biologist, from Anchorage. The elderly couple were Perry and Constance Whitmore, 71 and 68, respectively. Perry had the broken leg, a compound fracture that had been set as well as could be managed with sticks and duct tape. Constance had pneumonia. Wade could hear it in her breathing, wet and labored. "We need to get you out of here." Wade said, pulling emergency blankets from his kit. My plane's on the ice. Can you walk? Natasha nodded. I can. Perry might manage with support. Constance. She looked at the older woman with obvious concern. She's been getting worse the last few days. Wade wrapped the emergency blanket around Constance's shoulders. She opened her eyes, pale blue and rheumy with fever, and managed a small smile. You're real, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Perry said someone would come. I was starting to think we'd dreamed you up. I'm real, Wade assured her, and I'm getting you home. As Wade worked, something inside him, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years, began, ever so slightly, to thaw. Wade radioed Moira with a full situation report while doing quick medical assessments. Frostbite on all 3, various stages of severity. Dehydration, despite their attempts to melt snow. Malnutrition, they'd been rationing whatever food they'd salvaged from the crash. Perry's leg was infected, the skin around the splint hot to the touch. Constance's fever had to be running at least 103. Search and rescue is mobilizing, Moira reported, but they're looking at 90 minutes minimum to get a helicopter to your location. Weather's moving in from the west. Wade looked at the darkening sky. 90 minutes might be too long, especially for Constance. I can fly them out myself. I'll take the most critical first. Come back for the others. Wade, that's 3 trips in deteriorating conditions. I know what it is, Moira. I also know what it means to wait 90 minutes when you've already waited 3 weeks. Pause. Your call, pilot. Be careful. Wade turned to the group. Help me get Constance to the plane. We'll take her first, and you're coming with us, Natasha. Perry. I know you want to stay together, but your wife needs immediate medical attention. I'll be back for you within the hour. I promise. Perry gripped Wade's arm with surprising strength. You better be, son. I didn't keep that woman alive for 3 weeks just to lose her now. You have my word. Getting Constance to the plane took 20 minutes. She couldn't walk, so Wade fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and fabric. He and Natasha dragged it carefully across the ice. Every few minutes, Wade stopped to check the surface, listening for any sounds of stress or cracking. The ice held, but the sky was definitely darkening, clouds moving in from the west like a grey curtain. They got Constance secured in the back of the Cessna, wrapped in every blanket Wade could spare. Natasha climbed into the co-pilot's seat, and Wade ran through his pre-flight check faster than usual, but no less thoroughly. You know how to fly? Wade asked, as he taxied away from the shore. No, Natasha said, but I'm a quick learner if you need help. Just keep an eye on those instruments there. If any of the needles move into the red zones, tell me immediately. Wade brought the Cessna around and pushed the throttle forward. The plane picked up speed, skis hissing on the frozen surface, and then they were airborne, climbing into the failing light. As they gained altitude, Wade glanced at Natasha. Her hands were shaking, reaction setting in now that the immediate crisis had passed. You did good work out there, he said. 3 weeks is a long time to keep everyone alive. Perry did most of it, she said, her voice tight. He's the one who knew how to set his own leg, how to build the shelter, how to ration the food. He's the one who insisted we carve the SOS, even when it seemed hopeless. What happened? How'd you end? Up, out there. Natasha was quiet for a moment, staring out at the wilderness below. I was flying the Whitmores up to Beaver Creek. They wanted to visit their daughter before. She stopped, swallowed hard. Constance has been sick for a while. Not the pneumonia that came after the crash. Cancer. Stage 4. They wanted to see their daughter one more time while Constance was still strong enough to travel. Wade felt something twist in his chest. I'm sorry. We were maybe 30 minutes from Beaver Creek when the engine started acting strange. Oil pressure dropping, temperature climbing. I tried to make it, but... She gestured vaguely at the wilderness below. We went down in the trees. I managed to keep the wings level, but we hit hard. Perry's leg broke on impact. The plane was totaled. My radio was smashed. The emergency locator beacon wasn't transmitting. We were just stuck. No one reported you missing? Filed a flight plan, but I'd told dispatch we might stop at a few places along the way. When we didn't show up at Beaver Creek, they assumed we'd diverted somewhere else. By the time they realized something was wrong, we were already a week into it. And then the snow came, covered the wreckage. Wade adjusted his heading, compensating for the crosswind. So you carved the message. Perry's idea. Took us 5 days, working in shifts. Used a survival knife and a small ice axe from the emergency kit. My hands were bleeding by the end of it. She looked at Wade, her dark eyes intense. I was starting to think no one would ever see it, that we'd carved our own epitaph. Someone saw it, Wade said quietly. You're going to be okay. The lights of Fairbanks appeared in the distance. Wade contacted the airport, declared an emergency, and was cleared for immediate landing. An ambulance was already waiting when he touched down. Paramedics swarmed the plane. They had Constance on a gurney within minutes. Wade gave a quick report: 3 weeks exposure, malnutrition, frostbite, suspected pneumonia, and septic infection. Good work getting them out, the lead paramedic said. Another day or two and we'd probably be recovering bodies instead of saving lives. Wade just nodded. He was already thinking about Perry, still out there waiting, trusting a stranger to come back for him. Moira appeared from the operations office. Weather's getting worse, Wade. You sure you want to go back out? I gave my word. He could wait for the helicopter. He's been waiting for 3 weeks, Moira. I'm not making him wait any longer. She studied his face, then nodded. Fuel trucks standing by. We'll have you topped off in 10 minutes. Wade supervised the refueling and was back in the air before the ambulance had even left the airport. The flight back to Mirror Lake felt longer, probably because he was flying into worsening weather and fading light. But he'd made a promise to a man who'd kept his wife alive for 3 weeks with a broken leg. The Bleeze, too. Lake appeared below, the SOS still faintly visible even in the dusk. Wade brought the plane down smooth, taxied to the shore, and found Perry exactly where he'd left him, sitting calmly with his leg propped up. Told you I'd be back, Wade said. Perry looked up with a tired smile. Never doubted it for a second, son. How's my Constance? On her way to the hospital. They're taking good care of her. Then let's get me there too. They made it back to Fairbanks just as the first snow began to fall. Perry was loaded into a second ambulance, but before the doors closed, he grabbed Wade's hand. You saved our lives today, all 3 of us. I won't forget that. Wade stood on the tarmac as the snow fell around him, feeling strangely hollow. He'd saved 3 lives today. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like he'd glimpsed something he'd lost and couldn't quite remember how to find again. Wade drove home for the first time in 2 days, the journal sitting on the passenger seat like an accusation. He'd intended to leave it at the diner, let Natasha keep it, but somehow it had ended up in his truck anyway. His hands had reached for it without permission, his fingers closing around the worn cover before his brain could object. The house looked smaller than he remembered, though nothing about it had changed. Same blue siding, same sagging gutter he kept meaning to fix, same gravel driveway with weeds pushing through. He sat in the truck for a full minute before forcing himself to go inside. The air smelled stale, closed up. Wade opened a window despite the cold, needing the circulation more than the warmth. Lenore's jacket still hung by the door. Her reading glasses still sat on the side table next to her favorite chair. 3 years, and he'd changed nothing. Preserved everything like an exhibit, the life of Lenore Ellar, frozen in time. He made coffee that he didn't want and sat at the kitchen table that felt too big for one person. The journal sat in the front of him, daring him to open it. Wade lasted about 10 minutes before curiosity won. He flipped past the early entries, practical notes about rationing food, building shelter, Perry's injury. Found an entry from day 12, written in what he now recognized as Constance's careful handwriting. Perry thinks I don't know how bad the infection is getting. He tries to hide the pain, but I've been married to this man for 46 years. I know every expression on his face, every sound he makes. The infection is spreading. We're running out of time. But he keeps insisting we're going to be fine, keeps working on that ridiculous SOS message, even though his hands are bleeding from the cold. I asked him why he bothers, and he said, "Because giving up means I failed you, and I've never failed you in 46 years. Not starting now. I don't deserve this man, but I'm grateful every day that I have him." Wade closed the journal, something tight forming in his chest. 46 years. Perry and Constance had 46 years together, and even facing death in the wilderness, Perry's only thought was keeping his promise to his wife. Wade and Lenore had 15 years. Not nearly enough, but what had he done with them? He'd been a good husband, he thought, faithful, present, supportive. But had he told her every day how much she meant to him? Had he made every moment count? Or had he assumed they'd have more time, that there would always be tomorrow to say the important things? His phone buzzed. Text message from a number he hadn't seen in 8 months. Kieran. "Saw the news about the rescue. That was you, wasn't it? Pretty incredible, Dad." Wade stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every response he typed seemed wrong, too casual, too formal, too much like they hadn't spent 8 months not talking. Finally, he settled on something simple. "Yeah, it was me. Just happened to see their signal." The response came back within seconds. "Just happened to? Come on, Dad. You landed on an unknown frozen lake in bad weather and made multiple rescue flights. That's not luck. That's skill and courage." Something in Wade's throat tightened. When was the last time Kieran had called him courageous? When was the last time they'd had a conversation that felt real? "How are you doing?" Wade typed. "Work going okay?" "Work's fine. Busy season. We're doing environmental assessments for a major development project near Seattle. Long hours, but interesting." Wade tried to picture his son's life, an apartment somewhere in Seattle, maybe with a view of the water. Friends, routines, a whole existence Wade knew nothing about. When had that happened? When had his son become a stranger? "That's good. Glad you're keeping busy." A pause. Then, "Dad, I know things have been weird between us. After that call last spring." I shouldn't have said what I said. Wade's fingers trembled slightly over the keyboard. That call. When Kieran had accused him of dying along with Lenore, and Wade had been too drunk and too raw to do anything but hang up. "You weren't wrong," Wade typed, then deleted it. Started again. "We both said things we regret." Deleted that too. Finally settled on, "Water under the bridge, son. I'm just glad to hear from you. I've been thinking about coming up to Alaska for a visit. Maybe in a few weeks? I have some vacation time saved up, and it's been too long since I've seen the place." Wade read the message 3 times, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. Kieran wanted to visit. After 3 years of silence and distance and wounds that hadn't healed, his son wanted to come home. "I'd like that," Wade typed. "I'd really like that. Let me know when you're thinking, and I'll make sure I'm around." "Will do. And Dad, I'm proud of you. For the rescue." "Yeah, but also for still being out there doing what you love. Mom would be proud too." Wade had to set the phone down. His vision had blurred, and he didn't trust his hands. Mom would be proud too. When was the last time someone had invoked Lenore's name without it feeling like a knife? When was the last time thinking about her had brought something besides pain? He picked up the journal again, flipped to a different page. Natasha's handwriting this time, from day 17. "Perry asked me today why I never remarried after my divorce. I told him the truth. I was afraid. Afraid of failing again, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of losing someone else. He just looked at me with those wise old eyes and said, 'Fear's a poor compass, young lady. It'll keep you safe, but it'll also keep you alone.' Safety and loneliness make cold bedmates. Then he went back to carving that damn SOS message, and I sat there thinking about all the ways I've chosen safety over connection for the last 2 years. All the invitations I've declined, all the people I've kept at arm's length, all the opportunities I've let pass, because being alone felt easier than risking hurt. Perry's right. I've been safe. I've also been miserable. Wade closed the journal and stood, walking to the window. Outside, the Alaskan afternoon was already fading into evening, the sun barely making it above the horizon before starting its descent. Short days this time of year, short days, long nights, and too much time alone with your thoughts. His phone buzzed again. Moira this time. Local news still wants that interview. They're persistent. Also, Perry Whitmore called the office looking for you. Says he wants to thank you in person when he's feeling stronger. Gave me his daughter's number in case you want to visit. Wade looked at Perry's daughter's number, then at the journal, then at the text from Kieran still glowing on his screen. 3 weeks ago his life had been simple: fly, sleep, repeat. Avoid complications. Avoid connections. Avoid anything that might require him to feel something. Now everything was complicated. Survivors who wanted to thank him, a son who wanted to visit, a biologist who'd seen through his defenses with uncomfortable accuracy, a journal full of other people's truths that reflected his own too clearly to ignore. He could retreat back into isolation. It would be easy. He'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of emotional distance, or he could do something different, something that scared him more than any dangerous landing or engine failure he could let people in. Wade picked up his phone and typed a message to Moira. Tell the news people I'll do the interview. Tomorrow afternoon, if they can make it work. And send me Perry's daughter's information. I'd like to visit when he's up for it. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he opened his text thread with Kieran again. How about you come up in 2 weeks? I'll take some time off, and we can do some of those winter camping trips we used to do, if you're interested. The response came back almost immediately. I'd love that, Dad. I'll book the flight tonight. Wade set down the phone and looked around the house, really looked at it for the first time in years. It wasn't a museum, it was a house. A house where someone had once lived and laughed and loved, and where someone could live again if he had the courage to try. He walked to the closet and pulled out a box of photo albums, the ones he'd packed away after the funeral, because looking at them hurt too much. Opened the first album to a picture of Lenore holding newborn Kieran, her face radiant with joy and exhaustion. Another of Kieran at 5, missing his front teeth, holding up a fish he'd caught on one of their camping trips. Another of the 3 of them at Christmas, Lenore wearing the ridiculous reindeer sweater she loved despite Wade's protests. These weren't exhibits in a museum, they were memories. Good memories that deserved to be remembered without only pain attached to them. Wade spent the rest of the evening going through the albums, and for the first time in 3 years, he let himself smile at the pictures. Let himself remember the good times without guilt. Let himself feel grateful for the 15 years he'd had, instead of bitter about the ones he'd lost. Around midnight, he found an envelope tucked in the back of the last album, his name on the front, written in Lenore's careful script. He recognized it immediately, the letter she'd written during her last week, the one he'd been carrying for 3 years without opening. Wade held it for a long time, feeling the weight of it, the promise and the pain it contained. Then, finally, he opened it. The letter was 2 pages, front and back, filled with Lenore's small, neat handwriting. Wade read it slowly, tears streaming down his face, as his wife told him she loved him, thanked him for their years together, asked him to forgive himself for things beyond his control, and most importantly, begged him to live after she was gone. The last paragraph hit hardest. Don't let grief steal the rest of your life, my love. I want you to be happy. I want you to love again, laugh again, take risks again. I want you to reconnect with Kieran and be the father I know you are. Most of all, I want you to remember that surviving isn't the same as living. Promise me you'll live. Promise me you'll try." Wade folded the letter carefully and held it to his chest, feeling something break open inside him that had been frozen solid for too long. "I promise," he whispered to the empty house. "I promise I'll try." The interview aired 3 days later on the local evening news. Wade sat in Moira's office, watching it on her ancient television, uncomfortable with seeing himself on screen. The reporter had been professional enough, asking questions about the rescue, about his years flying in Alaska, about what made him decide to land on that frozen lake. "I saw someone who needed help," Wade heard himself say on the recording. "That's really all there is to it. You don't leave people behind when they're counting on you." The reporter had smiled at that, then asked the question that made Wade shift in his seat even now, watching the playback. "Mr. Ellar, people who know you say you've been somewhat isolated since losing your wife 3 years ago. Did this rescue change anything for you personally?" On screen, Wade had gone quiet for a moment. Then, "Maybe it reminded me that life keeps moving forward, whether you're ready or not. Sometimes you have to decide if you're going to move with it or get left behind." Moira reached over and turned off the television. "That was good, Wade, real good. You should be proud. I just answered her questions. You did more than that. You let people see who you really are." She handed him a stack of messages. These came in after the broadcast. People wanting to thank you, share their own stories, tell you how much it meant to see something good on the news for once. Wade flipped through the messages, feeling overwhelmed. He'd spent 3 years trying to disappear, and now strangers were reaching out to him like he mattered. "There's one more thing," Moira said, pulling an envelope from her desk. "This came special delivery this morning, from Kieran." Wade's hands weren't quite steady as he took the envelope. Inside was a photograph, him and Kieran, from maybe 15 years ago, standing in front of the Cessna. Kieran couldn't have been more than 11, grinning gap-toothed at the camera while Wade's arm wrapped around his shoulder. On the back, in Kieran's handwriting, "Found this while packing. Thought you might want a copy. Can't wait to make some new memories. 2 weeks. Kay, that's a good kid you've got there," Moira said quietly. "He is. Better than I deserved these last few years. Maybe, but you're trying now, and that counts for something." Wade tucked the photograph carefully into his wallet, next to his pilot's license. That evening, he drove to the hospital to visit Perry. The older man was sitting up in bed when Wade arrived, his injured leg elevated and wrapped in fresh bandages, but his color was better and his eyes were clear. "There's the man himself," Perry said, gesturing Wade into the room. Come in. Pull up a chair." Wade sat, suddenly unsure what to say. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck and then left in a freezer for 3 weeks, but the doctors tell me I'll live." Perry studied Wade's face. "You look tired, son. You sleeping okay?" "Well enough." "That's a lie, but I'll let it pass." Perry shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "My daughter came up from Beaver Creek. Got to see Constance and me together for the first time in almost a year. You know what she said? She said she'd been afraid it would be the last time, that her mother wouldn't make it to Christmas. Now we're planning to spend the holidays together, all because you saw some letters in the ice. I was just in the right place at the right time." "Stop that," Perry said firmly. "Stop diminishing what you did. You made a choice that saved 3 lives, and that choice took courage. Own it." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Natasha said you talked a lot out there. About regrets." "I did. When you think you're dying, the truth comes easier. All the things you've been too proud or too scared to say suddenly seem urgent." Perry's expression softened. "I almost lost my daughter once. 10 years ago, we had a fight about something so stupid. I can't even remember what it was now. But I was stubborn, and she was stubborn, and neither of us would back down. 5 years we didn't speak. 5 years of her life. I missed a wedding, the birth of her first child, holidays, birthdays, all because I was too damn proud to pick up the phone and say I was sorry. What changed? Constance got sick the first time, breast cancer. Beat it, thank God, but it scared me straight. Made me realize that pride is a poor substitute for family. Perry met Wade's eyes directly. Moira told me you've got a son you haven't seen in a while. That true? 3 years. We talk sometimes, but it's not the same. Let me tell you something. I learned the hard way. Time with the people you love is the only currency that matters, and you can't get it back once it's spent. Whatever happened between you and your boy, whatever pride or hurt is keeping you apart, it's not worth losing him over. Trust me on that. Wade felt the photograph in his wallet like a weight. He's coming to visit in 2 weeks, first time since his mother's funeral. That's good. That's real good. Don't waste it, son. Don't let him leave without saying everything you need to say. They talked for another hour. Perry told stories about his 46 years with Constance, about raising their daughter, about the mistakes he'd made and the lessons he'd learned. Wade found himself talking too about Lenore, about the good years they'd had, about how losing her had broken something in him that he was only now beginning to repair. When visiting hours ended, Perry gripped Wade's hand. You saved my life out there on that lake. Now I'm going to return the favor. Stop running from your grief. Stop using work as an excuse to avoid living. Your wife is gone, and that's a tragedy, but you're still here. Honor her memory by living the life she wanted for you, not by building a shrine to the past. Wade drove home slowly, Perry's words echoing in his mind. Stop building a shrine to the past. He looked at his house as he pulled into the driveway, really looked at it. When had it stopped being a home and become a mausoleum? Inside, he made a decision. Started in the living room, taking down the photographs he'd left hanging but never looked at. Not packing them away this time, but arranging them differently. Adding new frames. Making space for new memories alongside the old. He moved Lenore's jacket from by the door to the bedroom closet, not throwing it away, but not leaving it hanging like she might walk through the door. Any moment either. Put her books on the shelf where they belonged instead of leaving them stacked on the table like she'd just set them down. Small changes, but each one felt significant. Like he was making room for life again, instead of just preserving what was gone. His phone rang. Natasha's number. Hey, she said when he answered. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. Everything okay? Yeah. I wanted to apologize for the other day. At the diner. I came on pretty strong with the personal questions and advice. Boone reminded me that I barely know you, and it wasn't my place. Boone talks too much. She laughed. He does, but he's not wrong. I overstepped. Wade looked around at the changes he'd made to the living room, thought about the letter from Lenore he'd finally read, about Kieran coming to visit. Actually, you were right. About most of it. I have been running, using work to avoid dealing with things. It's just hard to admit out loud. Tell me about it. I spent 2 years doing the same thing before. I ended up stranded on a frozen lake with nothing but time to think. A pause. Listen, I'm heading back to Anchorage tomorrow. My leave of absence from work is over, and I need to deal with some things. But I wanted to say thank you again, properly, before I left. Would you want to grab dinner? Nothing fancy. Just 2 people who survived something and came out the other side. Wade surprised himself by saying yes, without hesitation. They met at a small restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the menu hadn't changed in 20 years, and everyone knew everyone. Natasha looked better than she had at the diner. The frostbite damage was healing, and she'd gotten some rest. They talked about safe things at first, the weather, the food, their work. Then, gradually, they moved into deeper territory. She told him about her marriage ending, about throwing herself into research as a way to avoid the loneliness. He told her about Lenore, about Kieran, about the 3 years he'd spent in neutral gear. The thing is, Natasha said over coffee, sitting out there on that lake, I kept thinking about all the time I'd wasted. All the opportunities I'd let pass because I was afraid or too busy or whatever excuse I was using that day, and I promised myself that if I survived, I'd stop wasting time. I'd say yes more, take risks more, actually live instead of just going through the motions. How's that working out? Well, I asked a man I barely know to dinner, so I'd say I'm making progress. She smiled. What about you? What are you going to do differently? Wade thought about Kieran's upcoming visit, about the changes he'd made to the house, about Perry's words at the hospital. I'm going to stop building shrines and start building relationships. Starting with my son. That's good. That's really good, Wade. They walked out together into the cold night, and for the first time in 3 years, Wade felt like he was moving forward, instead of just treading water. The road ahead was uncertain, and the grief wasn't gone, probably never would be completely gone. But maybe Perry was right. Maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe it was time to actually live again. Wade spent the next week preparing for Kieran's visit in ways both practical and emotional. He cleaned the house properly for the first time in months, opening windows despite the cold, washing sheets that had sat unused in the guest room, stocking the refrigerator with actual food instead of his usual bachelor staples of coffee and frozen dinners. But the real preparation happened in smaller, harder ways. He went through boxes in the garage, finding Kieran's old camping gear, his fishing rod, the compass Wade had given him on his 10th birthday. The brass was tarnished now, but the engraving was still clear. So, you'll always find your way home. Wade held the compass for a long time, remembering the day he'd given it to Kieran. They'd been planning a camping trip to Denali, and Lenore had teased Wade about being overprotective. He's 10 years old, not heading into uncharted territory, she'd said, laughing. But Wade had wanted his son to have something meaningful, something that said what he couldn't always put into words, that home wasn't just a place, it was people, and Wade would always be there to help his son find his way back, except he hadn't been there. Not when it mattered most. Not when Kieran needed a father who could function through grief instead of drowning in it. Wade set the compass on the kitchen table, where he'd see it every day until Kieran arrived, a reminder of promises he needed to keep. Work continued, though Wade found himself declining the longer routes, the multi-day trips that had become his refuge. Moira noticed but didn't comment, just scheduled him for day runs and smiled knowingly when he actually showed up at the office to do paperwork instead of avoiding it. 5 days before Kieran's arrival, Natasha called from Anchorage. She'd been back at work for a week, settling into her research again, but something in her voice sounded wrong. Wade, I need to tell you something. About the crash. What about it? I got the preliminary investigation report. The fuel line failure that caused us to go down, it wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with it. Wade sat down slowly. You're sure? The investigators found tool marks on the coupling, evidence of deliberate loosening. Someone wanted that plane to fail. Her voice shook slightly. The Whitmores were just collateral damage. This was about me. Why would someone target you? She was quiet for a moment. My research. I've been documenting environmental damage from a mining operation up near the Brooks Range. The company, North Point Mining, they've been pressuring me to alter my findings, make things look less severe than they are. I refused. Started making noise about going public with the real data. And they decided to silence you. Looks that way. The plane I was flying belonged to the Research Institute. Easy access for someone who knew what they were doing. She paused. Wade, I'm scared. If they were willing to sabotage a plane, what else are they willing to do? Have you gone to the police? The investigators are involving law enforcement, but these things take time. Meanwhile, I got an anonymous message yesterday, slipped under my hotel room door. It said some questions are better left unasked. Wade's protective instincts kicked in immediately. You need to get somewhere safe. I'm staying with friends, changing hotels every few days. But I wanted you to know, you're part of this now, whether you meant to be or not. If they find out you have the journal, the evidence of what happened out there. Let them come. I'm not afraid of corporate bullies. You should be. These people tried to kill me, Wade. They won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." After they hung up, Wade sat in his kitchen, staring at the compass, thinking about risk and safety, about the life he'd been living versus the life Lenore had asked him to live in her letter. For 3 years, he'd taken the safe route, emotionally shut down, isolated, protected himself from any possibility of more pain. Now, life was asking if he had the courage to do something different, to stand up for someone who needed help, even if it meant putting himself at risk. He called Boone, explained the situation. The mechanic listened without interrupting, then said simply, "What do you need?" "I need to know if anyone's been asking questions about me, about the rescue, and I need someone watching my back. Consider it done. I've got friends who owe me favors. We'll keep eyes on your place, on your plane. Anyone comes sniffing around, we'll know about it." The next morning, Wade received a call from Perry. The older man had been released from the hospital and was staying with his daughter in Beaver Creek, but he'd heard about the investigation findings. "Son, Constance and I have been talking. We want to help. You've been through enough, Perry. You should focus on recovering. I spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor before I retired. I know how these operations work, how they try to intimidate witnesses, bury evidence, drag things out until people give up." Perry's voice was firm despite his recent ordeal. "I've still got contacts in law enforcement, people who can expedite investigations when corporate money tries to slow things down. Let me make some calls. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. Those people tried to kill my wife and me to cover up their crimes. I don't take kindly to that." Wade felt something shift in his chest, the realization that he wasn't alone in this. That people were willing to stand with him, to fight for what was right, even when it was dangerous. For 3 years, he'd isolated himself, convinced that needing people was a weakness. Now he was learning it might be the greatest strength. That afternoon, he drove out to the hangar to check on the Cessna. Boone was there with another man Wade didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, late 50s, with the careful eyes of someone who'd seen trouble before. "This is my friend Jasper," Boone said. "Former state trooper. He's going to help keep an eye on things." Jasper shook Wade's hand. "Boone tells me you've got some corporate types making threats. I've dealt with North Point Mining before. They're not good people, but they're predictable. We'll make sure they know you're not an easy target." Wade spent an hour going over security measures, keeping the plane locked in the hangar when not in use, varying his routes home, staying alert for surveillance. It felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than his actual life, but it was also clarifying. For the first time in years, he had something to fight for besides his own survival. That evening, Natasha called again. Perry's contacts came through. Federal investigators are opening a formal criminal investigation into North Point Mining. They want statements from all of us. That's good news. It also means we're officially witnesses in a federal case. These people are going to get desperate, Wade. Are you sure you want to be in the middle of this? Wade thought about Kieran coming to visit, about the life he was trying to rebuild, about Lenore's letter asking him to live fully. I'm sure some things are worth standing up for. After hanging up, Wade pulled out a box from the hall closet. Inside were letters he'd written to Kieran over the years, but never sent apologies, explanations, declarations of love that he'd been too afraid or too proud to share. He read through them now, seeing his own pain and regret spelled out in ink. Then he started a new letter. Not an apology this time, but a promise. A promise to be the father Kieran deserved, to be present and engaged, to stop hiding behind work and grief. A promise to show his son that it was never too late to change, to grow, to become better than you were. He was sealing the envelope when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Ellar?" A man's voice, cold and professional. "This is a courtesy call. The situation with Miss Cord is a private business matter that doesn't concern you. We'd appreciate if you'd keep it that way." "And if I don't?" Then you might find that small aviation companies can experience all sorts of unfortunate complications, mechanical failures, insurance problems, accidents. A pause. You seem like a smart man. I'm sure you'll make the right choice. The line went dead. Wade sat holding the phone, anger replacing fear. They'd just made a critical mistake. They'd threatened not just him, but his livelihood, his ability to provide for himself and eventually help Kieran. The thing they didn't understand was that he'd already lost everything that mattered 3 years ago. He wasn't afraid of losing material things. He called Natasha. I don't want you getting hurt because of my research. Too late. I'm already involved, and I'm not backing down. He looked at the letter to Kieran sitting on the table. I spent 3 years being afraid of feeling, afraid of connecting, afraid of living. I'm done with that. These people want a fight. They've got one. You're crazy. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally sane for the first time in years. After they hung up, Wade sat in his kitchen, surrounded by the changes he'd made, photos on the walls, Kieran's compass on the table, Lenore's letter tucked safely in a drawer. This was what mattered. Not safety or comfort or the careful preservation of a life half-lived. He picked up the compass, feeling its weight, reading the inscription again. So you'll always find your way home. He'd lost his way for 3 years. But he was finding it again, step by difficult step. And he wasn't going to let anyone, not grief, not fear, not corporate thugs, stop him from getting all the way back. The threatening call changed everything. Wade contacted Perry, who immediately activated his network of former colleagues in federal law enforcement. Within 48 hours, they had confirmation of what Natasha had suspected. North Point Mining had a history of silencing environmental opposition through intimidation, legal harassment, and in at least 2 other cases, suspected sabotage that had never been proven. They're careful, Perry explained over the phone. Always maintain plausible deniability. Use contractors who can't be traced back to the company directly. But they leave patterns, and patterns can be followed. Wade met with Natasha and Perry's daughter Linda at a secure location, a small cabin outside Fairbanks that belonged to Boone's family. Natasha looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, that spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. I can't keep living like this, she said, wrapping her hands around a mug of coffee. Looking over my shoulder every minute, afraid to go home, wondering if every car behind me is following me. Then we go on offense, Wade said. Stop reacting and start acting. Linda, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd inherited her father's prosecutorial instincts, nodded. Dad's contacts have agreed to fast-track the investigation, but they need hard evidence. The sabotage of the plane is good, but it's not enough. We need to connect it directly to North Point's executives. What about the mechanic who serviced Natasha's plane? Wade asked. The one who disappeared? Found him, Linda said. Or rather, the FBI found him. He's in Montana, scared out of his mind. Apparently, North Point paid him $50,000 to tamper with the fuel line, told him it was just supposed to cause a forced landing, not a fatal crash. When he realized, people almost died, he ran. Will he testify? He's talking to the FBI now. With his testimony and the physical evidence from the crash, we can build a case. But here's the thing. North Point knows we're building that case. They're going to try one last time to shut this down before it goes public. Wade felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean, one last time? My dad's dealt with companies like this before. When intimidation doesn't work, they escalate. They're probably planning something bigger, something that will either scare you all into silence or eliminate the problem permanently. Natasha set down her coffee cup with a shaking hand. You're saying they might try again? To kill us? I'm saying we need to be very careful for the next week or 2. Once the FBI makes arrests, you'll be safe. But until then, you're vulnerable. They spent the next hour going over security protocols. Natasha would stay at the cabin with Boone's family watching over her. Wade would maintain his normal routine, but with Jasper and other friends keeping close surveillance. Linda would coordinate with the FBI and keep everyone updated on the investigation's progress. As they were wrapping up, Wade's phone rang. Kieran. "Hey, Dad, I know this is last minute, but I managed to move some things around. I can fly up tomorrow instead of next week. That work for you?" Wade's first instinct was to say no, to keep Kieran away from the danger. But something stopped him, the memory of Perry's words about time wasted, about pride and fear stealing precious moments. "That works great, son. I'll pick you up at the airport. What time's your flight?" After hanging up, Wade looked at Natasha and Linda. "My son's coming tomorrow. I need to keep him safe. Tell him what's happening," Linda suggested. "Don't hide it. He's a grown man. He deserves to know." Wade wrestled with that advice all evening. Part of him wanted to protect Kieran from the mess he'd gotten involved in. But the larger part, the part that was learning to be honest again, knew Linda was right. No more hiding, no more protecting people by pushing them away. The next morning, Wade drove to the airport alone, despite Boone's suggestion of backup. This was his son, his moment, and he wanted it to be real. The flight landed on time, and Wade stood in the small terminal watching passengers emerge, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with seeing Kieran for the first time in 3 years. Then, there he was, taller than Wade remembered, broader in the shoulders, with Lenore's dark eyes and Wade's stubborn jaw. 26 years old and completely grown up. When had that happened? Their hug was awkward at first, 3 years of distance making them uncertain. But then Kieran squeezed tighter, and Wade felt his son's shoulders shake slightly, and he realized Kieran had missed him just as much. "It's good to see you, Dad. You too, son. You too." In the truck, Wade made the decision. "Kieran, there's something I need to tell you about. Something that's been happening since the rescue." He laid it all out: the sabotaged plane, North Point mining, the threats, the investigation. Watched Kieran's expression shift from surprise to concern to something that looked like determination. "So what you're telling me is that you saved 3 people's lives, and now some corporate criminals are trying to intimidate you into silence. That's about the size of it." Kieran was quiet for a moment. "And you're not backing down?" "No, I'm not." "Good." Kieran looked at his father with something like pride. "Then I'm staying. I can help." "Kieran, this could be dangerous." "Dad, I didn't fly up here to sit in your house while you deal with this alone. That's what family does. They stick together when things get hard." He paused. "That's what Mum would have wanted. That's what I want." Wade felt his throat tighten. "When did you get so grown up?" "Had to, eventually. You taught me how." They drove to Boone's hangar, where Wade wanted to check on the Cessna before heading home. Jasper was there, along with Boone and 2 other men Wade recognized from around the airfield, fellow pilots who'd heard about the situation and volunteered to help. "Your dad's got himself into some trouble," Boone said to Kieran, shaking his hand. "But he's also got friends. We look after our own up here." The show of solidarity moved Wade more than he could express. For 3 years, he'd isolated himself, convinced he didn't need anyone. Now people were rallying around him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because somewhere along the way, despite his best efforts to disappear, he'd built connections that mattered. They were discussing security arrangements when Linda called. "Wade, we've got a problem. The FBI just informed me that North Point executives are in Fairbanks. They flew in this morning. No stated business reason, and they're being cagey about their plans. That can't be coincidence." "It's not. They're here for something specific. The FBI is tracking them, but I wanted you to be aware. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Wade looked at Kieran, at Boone and Jasper and the other pilots gathered in the hangar. "Let them come. I'm done hiding." That night, Wade and Kieran stayed at the house, but with Jasper parked down the street and Boone checking in every hour. Father and son sat in the living room, talking in a way they hadn't in years. Kieran asked about the rescue, about Perry and Constance and Natasha. Wade asked about Seattle, about Kieran's work, about the life his son had built. "I was angry at you for a long time," Kieran admitted. "After Mom died, the way you shut down, shut me out. I felt like I'd lost both parents that day." "You were right. You did lose both parents. I'm sorry for that, Kieran. Sorrier than I can say." "I know. But here's the thing. Dad, you're here now. You're trying. That counts for something." Kieran pulled out a small box. "I brought something for you. Found it in Mum's things when I was packing up her craft room last year. Inside was Lenore's wedding ring, the one Wade had given her, not the one he wore around his neck. The engagement ring with the small diamond that he'd saved for months to afford. "She wanted you to have it," Kieran said. "Left a note saying that when you were ready to move forward, this should be a reminder that she wanted you to be happy. That love doesn't end. It just changes form." Wade held the ring, feeling the weight of it, the memories and the promise. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing to try." Kieran smiled. "Kind of like how you weren't ready to be a father when I was born, but you tried anyway. Turned out pretty good, I think." They talked late into the night about Lenore and grief and healing, about mistakes and forgiveness, about the future and second chances. When Kieran finally headed to bed, Wade sat alone in the living room holding his wife's ring, thinking about everything that had happened since he'd spotted those 3 letters carved into frozen ice. He'd thought the rescue was about saving other people. Now he was beginning to understand it had been about saving himself, about remembering that life still had meaning, that connection still mattered, that he still had something to offer the world beyond just going through the motions. Around 2 in the morning, Wade's phone buzzed. Text from Natasha: "Linda just called. FBI lost track of the North Point executives. They slipped surveillance. Be careful." Wade looked out the window at Jasper's car, still parked and watching, checked the locks on the doors, picked up Lenore's ring and Kieran's compass and held them both, these artifacts of love and family and promises kept and broken and maybe someday renewed. Whatever was coming, he was ready. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he'd finally found something worth being afraid for, worth fighting for, worth living for. The night stayed quiet, but Wade didn't sleep. He kept watch over his house, his son, his second chance at the life he'd almost thrown away. Morning came grey and cold, the kind of January dawn that barely qualified as daylight. Wade had managed maybe an hour of sleep in the chair by the window, Lenore's ring still clutched in his palm. Kieran found him there, immediately understanding without asking. "They didn't come. Not yet. But they will." Wade stood, working the stiffness from his shoulders. "Coffee?" They made breakfast together in the small kitchen, a domestic scene that felt both familiar and strange after 3 years of absence. Kieran moved around the space like he'd never left, knowing where the mugs were kept, how Wade took his coffee. Small things, but they mattered. "What's the plan?" Kieran asked, scrambling eggs while Wade worked the coffee maker. "Honestly, I don't know. Wait for the FBI to make their arrests, I guess. Try not to let these people intimidate us into silence. That's not really a plan, Dad. That's just hoping things work out." Wade smiled despite the tension. "When did you get so practical?" "Mom. She always said hope was fine, but planning was better." Kieran plated the eggs. "So, let's make an actual plan. What's the endgame here?" They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Wade had read Lenore's letter, where he'd gone through the journal from the crash. Kieran pulled out his laptop and started making notes. "Okay, so the FBI needs evidence to arrest the North Point executives. They've got the mechanic's testimony, the physical evidence from the plane, and Natasha's research showing environmental violations. What else would help?" "The journal," Wade said suddenly. The one Natasha and the Whitmores kept during those 3 weeks. It documents everything, their condition, the crash, how they survived. If someone were trying to kill them, that journal is proof of the intent and the result. Where is it? Safe. I've been keeping it here. Wade retrieved it from his study, the worn pages now feeling precious rather than just painful. But there's more. Natasha mentioned she had her research data backed up on a portable drive. If we can get that combined with the journal and the testimony... His phone rang. Linda. Wade, the FBI wants to move today. They've located the North Point executives at a private airfield outside town. They're planning to leave the state, which means if we don't act now, we lose jurisdiction. What do they need from us? All the physical evidence. The journal, Natasha's research files, anything that corroborates the mechanic's testimony. Can you get it to them within the hour? Wade looked at Kieran, who was already nodding. We can do it. Where do we bring it? FBI field office downtown. I'll meet you there with my father. He's insisting on being present, bad leg and all. She paused. Wade, be careful. If North Point knows the FBI is closing in, they might make a desperate move. After hanging up, Wade gathered everything, the journal, copies of Natasha's preliminary research that she'd sent him, documentation of the threats he'd received. Kieran helped organize it all into folders, while Wade called Boone. We're bringing evidence to the FBI. I need you at the hangar making sure the Cessna is secure. If this goes sideways, we might need to move fast. On it. Jasper's already there. We've got your back. They were loading everything into Wade's truck when Natasha pulled up, looking determined despite the fear Wade could see in her eyes. Linda called me. I'm coming with you. This is my research, my fight. I'm not hiding while everyone else takes the risk. Natasha, don't. I've spent 3 weeks on a frozen lake staring at my own mortality. I'm not afraid of corporate thugs. She climbed into the truck. Besides, the FBI wants my testimony, first-hand. The drive to the FBI field office should have taken 20 minutes. They made it in 15. Kieran navigating while Wade drove, and Natasha made calls to ensure her remote data backups were accessible. Normal traffic, normal Tuesday morning in Fairbanks. Nothing seemed threatening. Which was why the black SUV that pulled out behind them at the third intersection felt wrong. Dad, Kieran said quietly. That vehicle. It's been following us since we left your street. Wade checked his mirrors. Professional tail, keeping 2 cars back, matching their speed. Everyone stay calm. We're headed to the FBI office anyway. They can't do anything stupid with federal agents waiting. But the SUV accelerated, closing the gap. A second vehicle appeared ahead, boxing them in. Wade's combat instincts from years of flying in dangerous conditions kicked in. He knew these streets, had lived here for decades. Hold on, he said, and took a hard right down a side street. The SUVs followed. Wade accelerated, weaving through residential streets, heading for the more populated downtown area. If they wanted to do something, he'd make them do it where witnesses could see. Call Linda, he told Kieran. Tell her we're being followed. Give her our location. Kieran was on the phone immediately while Natasha gripped the door handle, her face pale but determined. Wade took another turn, then another, trying to lose the tail. But these weren't amateurs. They anticipated his moves, stayed close. Then, ahead, flashing lights. Police cars blocking the intersection. Wade's heart leapt. Had Linda already sent help? But as they got closer, he saw the truth. These weren't regular police. They were private security vehicles dressed to look official, trying to funnel Wade toward a specific route. They're herding us, Wade said grimly. He spotted an alley, barely wide enough for the truck, and made a split-second decision. The truck scraped against brick walls but made it through, emerging onto a main street near the airport. The airport. Wade's territory. He knew every road, every access point, every gate. Change of plans, he said. We're going to the hangar. Boone and Jasper are there. We get the evidence secured on the plane, and we fly it straight to Anchorage where the main FBI office is. That's crazy, Natasha said. You have a better idea. She didn't. Wade drove like he flew, with absolute confidence in his abilities and his machine. The truck roared toward the small airfield, the SUVs still in pursuit. He called Boone. We're coming in hot. Get the hangar open. Get the Cessna ready. We need to be wheels up in 5 minutes. What's happening? No time. Just trust me. They skidded into the airfield, Wade's truck throwing gravel as it raced toward his hangar. Boone had the doors open, the Cessna already pulled out onto the tarmac. Jasper and 2 other pilots stood ready, and Wade saw with a surge of gratitude that they were armed. The black SUVs pulled up, disgorging 4 men in suits. Not quite threatening yet, but the intent was clear. Mr. Ellar, one of them called out. We just want to talk. No need for all this drama. Talk to the FBI, Wade called back, transferring boxes from the truck to the plane. Kieran and Natasha helped, moving fast. I've got nothing to say to you. The evidence you're carrying, it's based on faulty research, misinterpretations of data. We're prepared to make a very generous offer to resolve this quietly. Not interested. Wade secured the last box in the cargo hold. The lead man's expression hardened. Mr. Ellar, you're making a serious mistake. North Point Mining has significant resources and very long reach. You're putting yourself and everyone you care about at risk. Wade walked right up to him, close enough to see the calculation in the man's eyes. You know what I learned recently? That surviving isn't the same as living. That being afraid is a poor way to spend whatever time you've got left. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get in that plane with this evidence, and I'm going to fly it to the authorities. You're going to stand here and watch. And if you try to stop me, my friends here, he gestured to Boone, Jasper, and the other pilots, are going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you tried to do. You're bluffing. Try me. A standoff, tense and electric, then sirens. Real ones this time. Linda had called actual law enforcement, and 3 state trooper vehicles were pulling into the airfield. The North Point men retreated to their SUVs but didn't leave, clearly calculating their next move. Everyone in the plane, Wade ordered. Kieran, you're co-pilot. Natasha, strap in back. We're leaving now. I've never co-piloted before, Kieran protested. You're about to learn. Come on. They climbed aboard, Wade running through his pre-flight check at twice the normal speed. The engine caught, roared to life. He taxied toward the port runway, watching the SUVs in his peripheral vision. Tower, this is Tailwind 79er requesting immediate departure clearance. Tailwind 79er, you're cleared for immediate departure. Winds are calm, ceiling is 15,000, fly safe. Wade pushed the throttle forward. The Cessna accelerated down the runway, picking up speed. Behind them, one of the SUVs moved, trying to block their path. But Boone's truck intercepted it, forcing it aside. The wheels left the ground. They were airborne, climbing into the grey January morning, the evidence secure, the destination clear. Kieran looked at his father with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. That was insane. That was necessary. Wade leveled off at 5,000 feet, set his course for Anchorage. Welcome to bush flying, son. Natasha laughed from the back, slightly hysterical but genuine. I survived 3 weeks on a frozen lake, and now I'm fleeing corporate assassins in a bush plane. This is not how I saw my life. Going could be worse, Wade said. At least this time, you're headed toward help instead of away from it. He radioed ahead to Linda, who confirmed FBI agents would be waiting at the Anchorage airport. The flight would take about an hour. Wade kept the plane steady, alert for any signs of pursuit, but the skies stayed clear. Kieran pulled out the compass Wade had given him years ago. You kept this. Never had the heart to throw it away, so you'll always find your way home. We're finding our way now, aren't we? Both of us. Wade looked at his son, this brave, capable young man who'd stayed by his side despite the danger, who'd believed in him when he barely believed in himself. "Yeah, son, I think we are." The mountains passed below, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere behind them, North Point Mining was scrambling to contain the damage. But it was too late. The evidence was in the air, headed for federal hands, and the truth was about to come out. Wade thought about Perry in that makeshift shelter, refusing to give up, about Constance fighting to survive, about Natasha carving desperate letters into frozen ice, about the courage it took to keep going when everything said to quit. He'd been quitting for 3 years, running from life, from connection, from anything that might hurt. He was done running. The Anchorage skyline appeared through the clouds like a promise. Wade had made this flight hundreds of times, but never with his heart pounding quite like this, never with his son beside him in the co-pilot's seat, learning to read instruments, never with evidence that could bring down a corporation sitting in his cargo hold. Anchorage Tower, this is Tailwind 79er requesting priority landing. We have federal agents expecting our arrival. Copy that, 79er. You're cleared for immediate approach, runway 2-7. FBI vehicles are standing by at the General Aviation Terminal. Wade brought the Cessna down smooth despite the crosswind, feeling Kieran's eyes on him, watching every adjustment, every correction, teaching moment in the middle of chaos. That's what fatherhood had always been, he supposed. You did your best and hoped it was enough. The wheels touched down soft, and Wade taxied toward the terminal where he could see 3 black SUVs, these ones actually federal, with proper markings and agents in windbreakers standing ready. Linda was there too, Perry beside her in a wheelchair, his casted leg propped up. Constance stood behind them, wrapped in a heavy coat, looking frail but determined. Wade cut the engine and turned to Kieran. "That was good work up there. You've got natural instincts, learned from the best." Kieran's hand found Wade's shoulder, squeezed once. Everything they couldn't say yet, all the healing still needed, compressed into that single gesture. They climbed out into the cold afternoon. Federal agents moved forward immediately, hands extended. "Mr. Ellar, Agent Morrison, FBI, we understand you. Have evidence related to the North Point Mining investigation. In the cargo hold. Journal documenting the crash survivors' experience, research data showing environmental violations, and documentation of threats made against witnesses." While agents secured the evidence, Wade walked over to Perry and Constance. The older man looked better than he had in the hospital, color in his face, clarity in his eyes, but the wheelchair was a stark reminder of what he'd endured. "You didn't have to come," Wade said. "The hell I didn't. These people tried to kill my wife. I'm going to look them in the eye when the FBI arrests them." Perry's jaw was set. "Besides, I wanted to see this through. Wanted to thank you properly, face to face, for what you did. You already thanked me. That was for saving our lives. This is for showing me that courage looks like standing up when it's easier to walk away." Perry gripped Wade's hand. "You're a good man, Wade Ellar. Don't ever doubt that." Constance leaned forward, her voice soft but fierce. "What Perry's trying to say is, you gave us back our future. We're going to spend Christmas with our daughter, watch our grandchildren grow up, grow old together, because you saw 3 letters in the ice and decided they mattered." Wade felt his throat tighten. "Anyone would have." "No," Natasha said, joining them. "Anyone wouldn't have. Most people would have reported it and moved on. You landed. You came back. You risked everything." She looked around at the gathered group, federal agents, survivors, friends. "You brought all of us together. That matters more than you know." Agent Morrison approached, holding the journal. "Mr. Ellar, this documentation is extraordinary. Combined with the mechanic's testimony and the physical evidence from the crash, we have more than enough for arrests. The U.S. attorney is drawing up warrants now. How long? We'll move within the hour." North Point executives are still in Alaska, thinking they have time to cover their tracks. They don't. Morrison's expression was grim. What they did, sabotaging an aircraft, attempting murder, witness intimidation, we don't take that lightly. They're going to face serious prison time. Wade nodded, feeling something loosen in his chest. It was over. Or at least the dangerous part was over. Natasha would be safe. The truth would come out. Justice, maybe, had a chance. Kieran appeared at his elbow. "Dad, the agents want statements from all of us. They said it might take a few hours." "That's fine. We've got time." Wade looked at his son. Really looked at him. "Thank you for being here. For standing with me. Where else would I be? You're my father." Kieran's voice cracked slightly. "I wasted 3 years being angry instead of just being present. I'm not wasting any more time." They spent the next 3 hours in a conference room at the FBI field office, giving detailed statements. Wade described finding the survivors, the rescue flights, the P2, subsequent threats. Natasha walked through her research and the pressure she'd faced to falsify data. Perry provided context about corporate intimidation tactics and legal precedents. Even Constance gave testimony, her quiet dignity more powerful than any theatrics. Through it all, Wade kept thinking about the journey that had brought them here. 3 letters carved in ice. A desperate message that had saved more than just 3 lives. It had pulled Wade out of his own frozen wasteland, reminded him that connection mattered, that standing up for something was worth the risk. As the sun set over Anchorage, Agent Morrison returned with news. Arrests have been made. 4 North Point executives, including the CEO, plus 2 contractors involved in the sabotage. They're in custody. You're safe now. The relief in the room was palpable. Natasha sagged in her chair, tears streaming down her face. Perry pulled Constance close, his own eyes wet. Linda smiled. Victorious. Wade just felt tired. Good tired, the kind that came from fighting the right fight and winning. Kieran's hand found his shoulder again. "We did it, Dad." "Yeah, son, we did." They flew back to Fairbanks the next morning, the weight of danger finally lifted. Wade kept the plane steady through clear skies, while Kieran handled the radio communications, growing more confident with each exchange. In the back seat, Natasha dozed, the first real sleep she'd had in weeks. The landscape below was the same wilderness Wade had flown over for 20 years, but somehow it looked different now. Less like an escape and more like home. The white expanses, the dark spruce forests, the frozen rivers catching morning light, all of it felt like it belonged to him again, instead of being just scenery to pass through. "You thinking about Mom?" Kieran asked quietly, watching his father's face. Wade glanced at his son, surprised. "How'd you know?" "You get this look, peaceful but sad at the same time. I remember it from when I was a kid, before she got sick. You'd look at her across the dinner table with that exact expression. She'd be proud of you, of the man you've become. She'd be proud of you too, for not giving up, for fighting back." Kieran adjusted the heading slightly, hands steady on the controls. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "That night, the one we fought, when I said you died with her." Kieran's voice was tight. "Did I push you away, or were you already gone?" Wade was quiet for a long moment, the engine's hum filling the space between them. "You didn't push me away, son. I was already drowning, and I was too proud or too scared to let you throw me a lifeline. I thought if I could just keep moving, keep working, keep flying, the pain would eventually fade. All I did was freeze myself solid. What changed?" 3 letters carved in ice, 3 people who refused to give up even when giving up made sense. A journal full of regrets about time wasted and words unsaid. Wade looked at Kieran directly, and a son who was brave enough to come back even after I'd pushed him away. "You changed it, Kieran. You gave me a reason to thaw out." They were both crying now. Wade's vision blurred, but his hands steady on the controls, because that's what 20 years of flying taught you. You kept the plane level, even when everything else was falling apart. I missed you, Dad. Every day for 3 years. I missed you. I missed you too. And I'm sorry. For shutting down, for shutting you out, for wasting time we can't get back. We've got time now, that's what matters. Fairbanks appeared ahead, familiar and welcoming. Wade radioed the tower, brought the Cessna down in a landing so smooth that Kieran barely felt the wheels touch. Boone was waiting at the hangar with Jasper, both men grinning like proud parents. "Heard you gave the FBI everything they needed," Boone said, pulling Wade into a bear hug. "Heard you flew like a madman to do it too. Just did what needed doing. That's becoming a habit with you. Good habit to have." Boone turned to Kieran. "Your old man's been a ghost for 3 years. Good to see him coming back to life." They spent the afternoon at the hangar, sharing the story with the other pilots who'd stood ready to help. The sense of community, of belonging, settled over Wade like a warm blanket. These people had his back. They always had, even when he'd been too isolated to notice. That evening, Wade and Kieran drove back to the house. The place that had felt like a museum for 3 years now just felt like a house lived in, real, full of possibility instead of just memories. "I was thinking," Kieran said as they pulled into the driveway, "maybe I could look for work up here. There are environmental firms in Anchorage. I could be closer." "If you want that." Wade's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I want that more than you know." "Good, because I'm tired of being so far away. And honestly, after the last few days, I realize life's too short to live somewhere just because it's convenient. I want to be where family is." They made dinner together, something simple but filling. Over the meal, they talked about the future, Kieran's potential move, places he could live, work he could do. Wade found himself actually planning ahead for the first time in years, thinking about months and years instead of just the next flight. His phone rang. "Natasha." "Hey, just wanted to check in. See how you're both doing." "We're good. Really good, actually." "I'm glad. Listen, Perry and Constance are heading back to their daughter's place tomorrow, but they want to do a dinner tonight. All of us together. Can you make it?" Wade looked at Kieran, who was already nodding. "We'll be there." The restaurant was small and warm, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Perry and Constance were already seated when Wade and Kieran arrived, Linda with them. Natasha showed up moments later, looking more relaxed than Wade had ever seen her. They ordered food and told stories about the rescue, about the investigation, about narrow escapes and federal agents and justice finally served. But mostly, they talked about the future, about Perry and Constance's plans to travel while they still could, about Natasha's research continuing without corporate interference, about Kieran's potential move north, about second chances and new beginnings. Perry raised his glass. "To Wade Ellar, the man who saw 3 letters in the ice and decided they were worth landing for." "To Wade!" everyone echoed. Wade felt Kieran's hand on his shoulder, saw the warmth in Natasha's eyes, the gratitude in Perry and Constance's faces, felt the weight of Lenore's ring in his pocket, not a burden anymore, but a blessing. A reminder that love didn't end, it just changed form. "To all of us," Wade said quietly, "to surviving and to actually living." They touched glasses, and Wade finally understood what Lenore had been trying to tell him in her letter. Life didn't end when you lost someone. It changed, shifted, became something different, but it went on, and you could either go on with it or get left behind. Wade chose to go on. 2 months later, spring was beginning to touch Alaska. Not the dramatic spring of lower latitudes, but the subtle shift that people who lived this far north learned to recognize the sun staying above the horizon a little longer each day. The temperature creeping above freezing during the afternoons, the first brave patches of earth emerging from the snow. Wade stood on the porch of his house, coffee in hand, watching the morning light paint the mountains gold. The house felt different now. Lived in. Kieran had moved into the guest room temporarily while apartment hunting in Anchorage, and the place had sounds again, footsteps, conversation, laughter, life. Inside, Kieran was on the phone with a potential employer, his resume spread across the kitchen table alongside Wade's flight charts. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past weeks, learning how to be father and son again. Some mornings they flew together, Wade teaching Kieran the skills he'd need for his commercial pilot's license. Other days they just talked, filling in 3 years of silence with honesty and healing. The charges against North Point Mining had made national news. The CEO and 3 other executives were facing federal prosecution for sabotage, attempted murder, and environmental crimes. The mechanic who'd been paid to tamper with the fuel line had been granted immunity in exchange for testimony. Natasha's research was being published in major scientific journals, no longer suppressed by corporate pressure. Perry and Constance had spent Christmas with their daughter as planned, and sent Wade a card with a photo, 3 generations gathered around a tree, everyone smiling. Perry's leg was healing well. Constance's cancer was still stage 4, but she'd beaten the pneumonia and gained back some weight. The doctors said she might have a year, maybe more. Time bought by 3 letters carved in ice, and a pilot who'd cared enough to land. Wade's phone buzzed. Text from Natasha. "Coffee this morning? Have something to tell you." They'd been meeting for coffee every few weeks, a friendship that had grown from shared trauma into something genuine. She'd been offered a position at a research institute in Fairbanks, closer to her field sites and farther from the corporate politics of Anchorage. She was considering it. "Tell Natasha I said hi," Kieran called from inside. "Will do. I'll be back in an hour." Wade drove into town, the route familiar and comfortable. The streets he'd been driving for 20 years felt like they belonged to him again instead of being just paths between destinations. He noticed things now, the way Mrs. Chen always had her curtains open by 7, how the coffee shop on 3rd Street had replaced their sign, the fact that spring was actually coming despite the snow, still covering most surfaces. Natasha was already at their usual booth when he arrived, 2 cups of coffee waiting. She looked good. The frostbite scars had faded to pink lines that would eventually turn white, and she'd gained back the weight she'd lost during those 3 weeks on Mirror Lake. "You look happy," Wade said, sliding into the booth. "I am. I took the job in Fairbanks, start next month." "That's great news." "It is. But that's not what I wanted to tell you." She pulled out her phone, showed him a photo. "Remember how we carved that SOS? How much work it took, how desperate we were." "I remember. Someone turned it into a memorial. Look." The photo showed Mirror Lake, but instead of the crude distress signal, someone had carved something beautiful. The letters SOS were still there, but around them were words, where 3 were saved and 1 found his way home. Below that, a date, the day Wade had landed. Who did this? Perry. He hired a crew to go out there last week, before the spring thaw, said it needed to be remembered. Not just the rescue, but what it meant. What it means. Natasha's eyes were bright. "He wanted you to know that you didn't just save 3 lives that day, Wade. You reminded a lot of people that courage looks like showing up when it's easier to walk away." Wade stared at the photo, his throat tight. The memorial would last through the spring, maybe into summer before the ice melted completely. Then it would be gone, returned to water and memory. But for now, it was their proof that 3 letters and 1 decision had mattered. "There's something else," Natasha said. "The Research Institute wants to do a series on bush pilots who risk their lives for remote communities. They want to interview you, feature your story. I don't need to be featured, I know, but maybe other people need to hear it. Maybe some pilot somewhere will read about you and remember that the job isn't just about flying, it's about the people you're flying for." She paused. "Or maybe some grieving father will read it and realize it's not too late to reconnect with his son. You never know who needs to hear your story, Wade." He thought about that, about the journal that had changed his life, about Perry's words in the hospital, about Lenore's letter asking him to live. Someone else's story had saved him. Maybe his could help someone else. Okay, I'll do the interview. They talked for another hour about her new job, about Kieran's apartment search, about the future in general terms. When Wade finally stood to leave, Natasha caught his hand. Thank you. For everything. For saving us, for standing up to North Point, for being brave enough to let people in again. Thank you. For seeing through my walls. For calling me on my isolation. We saved each other, I think. That's how it works sometimes. Wade drove home thinking about salvation and second chances, about how you never knew which day would be the one that changed everything. 2 months ago, he'd been a ghost, haunting his own life. Now he had a son sleeping in his guest room, a friend who called him on his nonsense, a community that had his back, and a future that felt possible again. The house wasn't a museum anymore. The photos on the walls told stories instead of haunting him. Lenore's things were integrated into the space instead of preserved like exhibits. He'd even started cooking again, actual meals that required recipes and care. Kieran was off the phone when Wade returned, looking pleased. They offered me the job. Environmental consulting firm in Anchorage. Start in 3 weeks. That's wonderful, son. Yeah, and I found an apartment. Small place near the university. But I was thinking maybe I could come up here on weekends sometimes. Keep learning to fly, spend time with my old man. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. That afternoon they flew together, not for work, not out of necessity, just for the joy of it. Wade let Kieran take the push, controls more, correcting less, trusting more. Below them, Alaska stretched endless and beautiful, still frozen but promising thaw. They flew over Mirror Lake, and Wade could just make out the memorial carved into the ice. The letters were already softening at the edges, spring working its inevitable magic. Soon it would be gone, melted back into water, but the memory would remain. 3 letters, 1 decision. Everything changed. Wade looked at his son, confident and capable at the controls. Thought about Natasha finding her courage again, about Perry and Constance buying time to love each other, about a community that had rallied when he needed them. Thought about Lenore and her final letter asking him to live. He was living now, really living. Not just surviving, not just going through motions, but engaging with the world and the people in it. Taking risks, making connections, choosing hope over fear. The sun was setting as they headed back to Fairbanks, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Kieran landed the plane with Wade's guidance, smooth and confident. They secured the Cessna in the hangar, working together in comfortable silence. "Hey, Dad," Kieran said as they walked to the truck. "I'm glad I came. I'm glad we found our way back to each other." Wade pulled his son into a hug, no longer afraid of the emotion, no longer hiding behind walls. "Me too, son. Me too." That night, Wade sat on his porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. He pulled out Lenore's ring, the one Kieran had given him, and held it in his palm. Not a weight anymore. Just a memory. A good memory. "I kept my promise," he said quietly to the night, to his wife, to himself. "I'm living. I'm really living." The wind carried his words away into the vast Alaskan wilderness, and somewhere in the distance, a plane's engine hummed, another pilot flying home through the gathering dark, another person choosing to show up, to try, to care. Wade Ellar had spent 3 years frozen, solid, grief turning him to ice. Then 3 letters carved by desperate hands had given him permission to thaw, to feel again, to connect again, to live again, the rescue that had saved him most of all. He went inside to where his son was making dinner, where laughter and life waited, where the future stretched out full of possibility. The museum was gone. Home had returned. And Wade was finally, truly home.